In 1960, legendary director Alfred Hitchcock made movie history when his hit film Psycho hit theaters. One of the all-time most famous movies ever made, Psycho was a masterclass of tension, mystery, and genuine horror. Following a lady on the run, she stops at a ran-down motel which is ran by the quite weird Norman Bates. Norman would become one of the most iconic horror villains, and maybe slasher villains if you count the sequels, but he's far from the standout of Psycho. The standout in Psycho is obviously the shower scene. The shower scene in Psycho alone is one of the most famous scenes in film history. The movie is truly special as I genuinely believe it's one of the best films ever made. Its central story wraps around so well, and the shock twist at the halfway point when the main character dies, it's just so great. The ending as well, so iconic, with Norman smiling at the camera with the famous "he wouldn't hurt a fly" line. It's honestly a perfect film, an open and shut case that wraps up so nicely. So why the fuck would they go and make a franchise? Apparently, someone at Universal thought the Hitchcock classic would be a great slasher franchise, and in 1982, a sequel was put in production. Now, I do know the Psycho novel the original is based off of does have multiple sequels, but I guess the sequel books have nothing to do with the sequel movies? It's really baffling that all of this exists, and the fact that all of it was turned into a franchise. What were they thinking here? This is like making a sequel to The Green Mile. There's absolutely no purpose here. Or is there? Psycho 2 was actually a box office hit and also received pretty good reviews generally. Rocking a 66% on Rotten Tomatoes, that might not sound like much, but for a horror, what one might even call a slasher sequel, released in 1983 to have a positive rating on Rotten Tomatoes, that's saying something. Hell, Saw didn't get its first positive rating on Rotten Tomatoes until 2023, and Saw was the highest grossing horror franchise for a decade. The success, however, would not last, as Psycho 3 pretty much bombed at the box office, despite having a very respectable 59% on Rotten Tomatoes. As a result, Psycho 4 was literally made for TV. Seeing such a bizarre franchise, a movie that shouldn't even have thoughts of a sequel, let alone an entire franchise, yet apparently one of them is good, and the third it has to be somewhat good if it has a 59% for a third sequel slasher released in 1986, 87, I believe it is. So apparently two of them are good here. They have recurring characters throughout, which I love, but yet it ends with a made-for-TV movie. How could a movie as famous as the original Psycho be made for TV? Well, I had to check it out. The question I leave to be answered is, was it worth it? Was making this worth it? Was watching this worth it? We are soon going to see. All I know going into this is Anthony Perkins, he's in all of them, the original Norman Bates, and 3 has to be a step down in quality because it got the franchise demoted to made for TV, so something had to have gone wrong there. So I'm very excited to do this. Let's roll. Psycho 2 follows Norman Bates being released from prison after being proven mentally sane in court 22 years after the events of the first film. Now, to start off, I'm not exactly sure what took so long to make this sequel. I'd imagine because, they didn't really make sequels back then, but you never really know. I couldn't find anything, so who really cares? But basically, Anthony Perkins was not down to return to the world of Psycho, as he thought it would be disrespectful to Hitchcock's legacy, which he was right, but was won over when he read the script. With this, it was kind of just like off to the races. Behind the camera, an all-star team was lined up to helm the project with Tom Holland, not that Tom Holland, the director of the original Child's Play, Chucky, was set to write the script. With this, director Richard Franklin was hired, and John Carpenter's cinematographer, Dean Cundey, was set to lead direction of photography. Which is honestly just a great get for any film. That guy's so good. He makes every shot look amazing. Watch The Fog if you haven't. That's really some just stellar work. But anyways, enough about Dean Cundey. This movie is pretty bad in my opinion. A lot of people genuinely love this movie, which honestly I just don't get. It's kind of boring. The central idea is really compelling, but I don't think it's executed the best. The idea of Norman trying to be normal, trying to reform, but the outside world never letting him move on from his past is a cool idea, and I like some of the things they do with it. I like the fact Norman is genuinely trying to get better here. It's revealed until like the last half hour he hasn't actually killed anybody, and is just being framed. There's also a ton of twists randomly thrown in here, some that work, some that really do not need to be here, and also some that just genuinely don't make any sense. The ending twist is genuinely offensive, especially if you love the first Psycho as much as I do. I do like the inclusion of Vera Myers reprising her role as Lila Crane from the original, but they turn her into this terrible person, which just honestly feels like a different character. On top of that, you have Jennifer Tilly's sister Meg here, who's probably the second best character outside of Norman. I like Meg Tilly's performance. Her motivations don't really make sense to me, but I like how she acts alongside Anthony Perkins. I think they had great on-screen chemistry. Also, the legendary Jerry Goldsmith performed the score for this movie, alongside just beautiful cinematography from Dean Cundey. I mean, like, that guy is just so good. I know I've already talked about it, but man. Richard Franklin's direction here is really, really good. I'm not familiar with him outside of this movie, but I guess Psycho was like the movie that birthed his love for films, so he was kind of waiting for this moment his whole life. You can genuinely tell that as he is directing his ass off here. And it's honestly, it's a shame that all of this is wasted by this pretty lackluster script from Tom Holland. Tom Holland, once again, not that one, is a great director. Like, his direction of Chucky in the original Child's Play is great, but there's a clear reason he didn't write that movie. This movie kind of feels all over the place with random scenes and dropped subplots. Norman gets a job for 20 minutes, he meets the co-lead of the film who also works there, and we just never go back to that. It all just kind of feels pointless. Anthony Perkins really is acting his ass off, as is everyone here honestly, but I did not need to see this movie. It is not a necessary addition to the sequel, or to the original. Cool ass poster though, fuck the ending twist, I'm giving it 2 stars out of 5. Psycho 3, Psycho 3. Oh my god, where do I begin with Psycho 3? So this time they actually got Anthony Perkins in the director's chair. I'm guessing that's because that's the only way they could convince him to come back, but also he did the 4th one, so I have no idea. Maybe this one just killed his career and he just had to take anything at that point. Psycho 3 is the slasherification of Norman Bates. It was kind of a thing in the second movie, but in this one, Norman Bates is turned onto a full-on slasher killer here. It's 1986 by the time this movie came out, so the slasher genre was booming with sequels around now. Like Halloween just made its return around this time. But man, I did not need Psycho turning into a slasher franchise. This movie fucking sucks. Charles Edward Pogue, who went on to write The Fly, somehow wrote this. The second one, I mean, I can at least see what they were going for. A psychological examination of a man trying to change, being beaten into morphing back into the monster he used to be due to society's rejection of his attempts to be normal. This, however, I don't know what the fuck the moral of the story is. There's barely a plot here, as most of the first hour and 10 minutes is just Norman killing people slowly, as if I'm watching Friday the 13th. Oh yeah, there's also this random Catholic nun subplot that absolutely goes nowhere. I promise you this is not as entertaining as it sounds. Like, it sounds crazy, but it's really just boring. I mean, the incredible Jeff Fahey, however you say his name, he's in this movie, and every time he appears on screen, it's immediately made into a better movie. He's fantastic, as always. If he wasn't in this, I don't think I would have been able to finish it, honestly. And even then, he bites it like 20 minutes before the end, and I was so fucking mad because I realized the next 20 minutes would not include him. However, the last 20 minutes is when the plot kicks in. With this reporter who's really done jack shit throughout the movie, she just appears at Norman's house to interview him, to talk to him, I guess because she suspects something's going wrong, but there's really nothing that she would have seen that would have given her a reasonable suspicion to go out there and check on him. I mean, I really don't know. She says he's a little weird, and she suspects him of having killed the lady who died in the second Psycho at the end, but like they literally worked together for 20 fucking minutes. I mean, there's really no like, she never left with him. They never saw her leave with Norman. They never saw her talking to Norman, really. She has like one line with Norman until the end, so why would she accuse him of murdering her? And also, she's been dead for a month at this point. Why would you act now? I mean, you do have some recurring actors, which I do enjoy. Like, the diner folk are the same. The sheriff is back from the second one. But honestly, the only true positive I can give this film, other than Jeff Fahey, is Anthony Perkins' direction. He genuinely emulates Hitchcock in some shots. Like, just watch this scene and tell me he didn't understand the assignment. Too bad everything else fucking sucks. 1 star. How did we fall so far? I don't even have much to say about Psycho 4. This movie is hilariously bad. Like, genuinely. The whole prequel idea between young Norman who wants to fuck his mom, who's played by Scream Queen Olivia Hussey, by the way, star of the original Black Christmas, is somehow in this. But, you know, so with the incredible plot of Norman trying to fuck his mom going on, they somehow double down on the stupidity, as for some reason Norman calls into this radio show to tell them that he killed his mom, which, for some reason, shocks this radio host to the point of being so desperate to keep him on the line that she is, like, having a mental breakdown to keep this guy talking. Like, what is the point of this? And to make it even worse, the radio show is literally doing an episode on people who killed their mothers. They are literally live interviewing a man who killed his mother during this. Why do they care about this random guy who's saying this so much? I mean, it's actually baffling. This film is full of just terrible acting. No offense to the legendary Olivia Hussey, but this performance is something straight out of Battlefield Earth. Just so overacted to the point where in no world could it be taken seriously. Somehow they got Anthony Perkins to return for this, but he really looks like he doesn't give a shit at this point, which I can't blame him. Henry Thomas as young Norman is probably the best performance here, but that's not really saying much despite the fact he is doing a pretty decent job. Also, the actress playing the radio host here is just awful. She's so over the top, it's absurd. Like, the lady must have thought she was cast in the Shawshank Redemption or some shit, not Psycho 4 The Beginning, made to premiere on Showtime. But what really sucks about this one is how shitty it looks. My god, what did they do to this? Like, why did they do this? Even the third one, for how shitty it was, it looked pretty good. I mean, they somehow make the iconic Bates Motel look like a damn soap opera here. It's embarrassing and shows how far we've truly fallen from the original. I really don't even have words at this point. I mean, an incest subplot, the acting is terrible, the budget is $10, half a star. This shouldn't fucking exist. Overall, I'd consider this a pretty damn disappointing franchise. I had some pretty high expectations because I really love obscure sequels to classics that are somehow good, but Psycho 2 definitely didn't scratch my itch. And outside of that, there's really nothing here other than the character assassination of Norman Bates. This should have never been a film franchise, and honestly I'm shocked they got to 4 films out of this. This really just was a misfire to go back to my question of was it worth it, no, I do not believe so. I do not believe that the sequels were worth making, and they definitely aren't worth watching. You can watch the first Psycho movie and be fully content with all the Psycho media you need. Don't even get me started on the fucking Vince Vaughn remake. This was honestly just, it feels like a waste of time, but it wasn't. It wasn't. I had a good time despite how much of this, it sounds like I hated it. I genuinely didn't mind this. If you want to do this, like watch the Psycho sequels, go for it. I personally wouldn't recommend, but if so, you do you. Thanks for watching. This has been a blast. See you in the next video.